Well, good evening. My name is Jeff Langhelm. I'm the Public Works Director here at the City of Gig Harbor. And I wanted to welcome you to the city's open house on stormwater utility revenue study. As you will see in our presentation tonight, the city has created a stormwater utility that dates back to 1984. And as you can imagine, it's been a while. Much has changed since 1984 in terms of how many properties have developed, the awareness of environmental regulations on development, and the establishment of environmental impacts because of development. I'm sure we can all agree that we live in an environmentally sensitive area. Just from the picture you have on the screen before you, you can see that we live in a beautiful area that has a lot of water around it. This environmentally sensitive water includes creeks, wetlands, estuaries, and the Puget Sound. For tonight's meeting, we are not going to be talking about new stormwater monthly rates. That's a topic for a separate day that will be occurring with the City Council later in 2021 and on into 2022. So stay tuned to our website for any updates on discussions specifically related to monthly utility rates. Now, in these times of COVID, we're holding these types of meetings and open houses a little differently. Instead of having them in person at the Civic Center or the Community Center, we hope that through this virtual open house, we're able to convey the necessary information and allow for the dialogue and questions and comments that happens often naturally and organically when we have an open house. We're going to make a full presentation here with the staff that I'll be introducing you to in a bit. And at the very end, we're going to be taking questions. As you might have heard, if you were on the meeting right before it started, this is being also streamed live on Facebook. For those of you who are watching via Facebook Live, please post any questions you have in the comment section, and staff will be reviewing those comments throughout the meeting. And at the end of the presentation, we can bring those questions, comments forward, and if necessary, answer those. But we want to note that on more slides as we advance through this presentation, there's going to be a slide number at the very top in the center and the title of the slide. Be sure if you have a question to jot down that slide number if you want to reference back to it, and we can then easily go back to that slide at the end. And then again, though, please hold your question till the end if possible. We'd like to just go ahead and present all the information and then answer questions at the end. So now I'd like to introduce the people that you have before you here from representing the city. We have myself, Public Works Director. We have Bree Ellis, our Stormwater Engineering Technician. She manages our NPDES stormwater permit and our everything to do with the implementation of the permit and the management of the permit. So she has a lot of duties on her hand. We have Heather Stites, our Utility Billing Technician. She is the person, if you have a utility account with the city, you've probably talked to or emailed her. We have Maureen Whitaker. She's our Public Works Assistant. She helps coordinate a lot of what Public Works does in the background. So we very much appreciate her keeping all of these cats herded and getting in the right direction. We have Mike Simmons. He's our GIS coordinator. He collects much of the data that the city gathers across all of Public Works. So that's parks, streets, water, stormwater, and wastewater. And he also helps out in the for planning, building, and police administration. But Mike is one of the main. He's put this story map together, the presentation you're having tonight, and collects a lot of data from all across the state and the city. And then lastly, we have Ashley Emery with Peninsula Financial Consulting. He is the finance guy who is working with us to make sure that we are projecting it for the future and comparing apples to apples as we proceed. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the presentation, and I'm going to hand this off to Bree Ellis, and she can talk about the creation of our stormwater utility.
Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, everybody. So first, let's talk about how a stormwater system is created. Gig Harbor is part of the Key Peninsula Gig Harbor Islands watershed, but we also break down the city into 13 basins. Each basin drains to a common point. Within each basin are natural channels, low points, tributaries, streams that all convey stormwater. On top of that, we add hard pipe and catch basins to collect all the runoff from hard surfaces. We also need access to all this infrastructure, so we add manholes for servicing and maintenance. And then we throw in a few storm ponds. We have over 70 storm ponds throughout the city. Also hidden under a lot of our streets and parking lots are stormwater vaults. And all of that infrastructure collects stormwater that discharges directly to Gig Harbor Bay and Henderson Bay to the north. We also have indirect discharge to Willachet Bay to the south via Bitter Creek and Gar Creek. I want to note that unlike sewer wastewater, stormwater is not treated before discharging into the Puget Sound. So all the pollution that is picked up along the way and carried through our stormwater system ends up in our waterways. As many of you know, Gig Harbor is growing. In 1984, we had 1.45 square miles of city, which is shown in green. And now we are up to 6.27 square miles, shown in pink. So we have quadrupled in size over the last 40 years. This shows what our stormwater system looked like in 1984. We had about 1,500 catch basins, 31 miles of pipe. And then this data is collected from the assets we have today. So it's likely we had fewer assets back then. And today we have over 4,000 catch basins, 97 miles of pipe, and 31 direct outfalls that go right to Gig Harbor Bay. So what will the future hold? We have an additional 4 square miles in our UGA that the city can expand to. Even without the UGA expansion, cities continue to add more hard surface areas. We add wider roads, more dense development, and our human footprint grows by individual lot. So now we know what our stormwater system looks like. What are our regulations? We are under an NPDES permit from the EPA, which is National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit. The EPA hands down that permit to state level ecology, and then eventually in our hands, the municipality level. So we have the Western Washington Phase 2 Municipality Stormwater Permit, and Gig Harbor has had that permit since 2008. About every 5 years, the permit is updated and more requirements are added. As of now, some of the requirements are stormwater planning, public outreach and education, mapping, IDDE, controlling runoff, and operations and maintenance being a big one. We have lots of staff working on stormwater stuff and tasks throughout the city, about 23 of us. And some staff work on stormwater about 10 hours a year, and some other staff, such as myself, work on stormwater 2,000 hours a year. Altogether, we spend about 9,000 hours on stormwater related tasks. Some of these things include responding to surface runoff complaints, fixing and repairing outfall erosion at outfalls, and then cleaning up and going to illicit dumping or discharges. In 2021, we estimate that we're going to spend about $1 million on stormwater operating expenses. You can see that street maintenance or operations and maintenance is a big chunk of that, but we also have lots of other things that we do for stormwater monitoring and permit compliance, and engineering and plan review, accounting, monthly billing, etc. Huge shout out to our stormwater field crew. They make things happen and continue to have water run downhill, rain or shine. They make it happen every day. So huge shout out to them. So now we know what our infrastructure looks like, and then also what our regulations consist of. What affects you directly as a single family resident? Each of our single family residents contributes to stormwater pollution, including roof runoff, yard pesticides, fertilizer, dog waste, car pollution, etc. Our current stormwater rates are set by EBUs, which is equivalent billing unit, and each single family resident is 1 EBU. Then we think about commercial and their pollution, potential pollution generating surfaces. More hard surfaces, more traffic, more auto pollution, and they're charged in a little bit different way. So whether it is single family resident, multifamily, or commercial, we all have a responsibility when it comes to stormwater. And Mike is going to show us some examples of those.
Yeah, thank you, Bree. We're going to dive into a little bit of the hard data now, and just to see some examples of the data that we're using for our evaluation. And this is the data that we are actually looking at. So through these examples, you're seeing the same things that we're seeing as we're moving through our process. Some of those things include kind of the size of lots and the area that they take up. Hard surfaces, you might also know those as impervious surfaces, but we're referring to them as hard surfaces, and how that relates to the size of the lots and the parcels. And then, of course, we're looking at the EBUs and how those rates are actually billed. So what we're going to do is just take a little tour through Gig Harbor here briefly, and just take you through a few examples of both residential and commercial, so we can get an idea of exactly some of the things that we're talking about that Bree has introduced. So we're going to start up here on Peacock Hill and head to the Northridge neighborhood, which you can see was established in 1977. So this is one of our older, more maybe classic neighborhoods, you could say, of Gig Harbor, where the lots were really cleared for a building envelope, a driveway, and a small yard. So you can see that there's a lot of vegetation in there. This site is approximately 10 acres, and I can turn on a little bit more data for you now so we can just see some of those things that we were speaking of. So the size of the area is about 10 acres. The hard surfaces, which include things like roofs, driveways, porches, decks, sidewalks that might be around the house. It does not include the public road. However, it is shown on these maps. So those for this 10 acres has approximately 2.4, near 2.5 acres of hard surfaces within the 10 acres. So that comes out to roughly 24% of these 10 acres in Northridge consists of hard surfaces. And because this is a single family residential area, their equivalent billing unit, the EBU, is 1 per household. So with there being 22 parcels on this 10 acres, we get 22 billing units from those 10 acres. So we'll take a little zoom out and head south to a newer and a little bit different sort of residential development. And we'll look at the Rosedale Village, which was approved in 2013. And you can see that this site here is about 27.5 acres. And we'll turn on some of this data again so that we can see that. And this consists of one large parcel. However, there are 80 units or 80 residents within this one parcel. So again, the site area is about 27.5 acres. Our hard surfaces, again, the roofs, sidewalks, porches, and patios make up about 7 acres of that. So we're at about 25% again for a residential area. And if we look at those EBUs, it's one EBU per unit. And again, we have 80 within this area. So we'll be receiving 80 equivalent billing units out of this one. There's a couple residential examples there. And we're going to head up to the uptown area, or down to the uptown area, excuse me. Now we'll have a look at some of the commercial developments, and we'll see, kind of how they're starting to add up here. And let's start with Harbor Plaza. This is the area where Ace Hardware, the new Met Market, is located at. And kind of as a side note, this was first developed while it was still part of Pierce County and then annexed into the city. So we'll see kind of how their stats line up as we start diving into commercial. So this area here is about 14 acres. Now, again, right, commercial areas, we're going to have parking lots and things of that sort. So you can see out of that 14 acres, about 12 of that is hard surfaces, which, you know, that's kind of to be expected. So their percent of hard surfaces are near 84%. However, you can see their EBU multiplier now is 248 for this particular commercial here. And I'm not exactly sure the number of businesses within there. So that's one bit of the missing puzzle for me just right now at this moment. But if we shoot across the street and head north to some of the newer developments, the new Fred Meyer, the Petco Oceans 5 lots, you can see it, we're at 6.44 for that Fred Meyer. Petco is about 7.6. So if you add that up, it's nearly the same size as Harbor Plaza. We can look at those site areas and percent of hard surfaces. So we're 89% for Fred Meyer, 85% for the Petco area. So again, right on par with the 83% below. However, if we take a look at those EBUs now, we can see that the new Fred Meyer is at only 2 and the Petco is at 6. So we've got similar size areas, similar hard surfaces, and different EBUs. So these are some of the discrepancies that we're trying to sort out and figure out as we go. And we can just have a quick look here at a couple of the other newer developments, and you can just see briefly look over the stats for those. And then we'll take a tour. Let's head down to the downtown area by the waterfront. We'll take a look at where the Seven Seas Brewery used to be, at the parcel that business was located on, here on Judson Street. This parcel is only 1.5 acres. It's, as you can see, even from the footage here, aerial footage, it's pretty much all hard surfaces with the exception of a very bottom corner. So we're at 99% hard surfaces. And we can also see that EBU multiplier now is at 29. So again, quite a discrepancy from some of the other businesses that we've, or commercial areas that we've seen. And the last stop on our tour for this evening is going to be a good representation of looking at some residential areas that are right next to commercial areas. So we can get a good feel for, you know, exactly what we need to start sorting out in our stormwater system and how we manage it here. If you look at the ridge at Gig Harbor is the residential area there in purple. You've got almost 20 acres, shy of that. And if you look at the Costco, we're at about 17.5, Home Depot 16, Target and Albertsons combined is about 16. So we're close to similar sizes for all of these. So again, we'll start with this residential. And for this whole neighborhood here, we've got 122 parcels in there. We've got 19 acres again, and 7.13 acres is the hard surface. So our percent hard surfaces are at 36.8, close to 37. If you'll recall, some of the earlier neighborhoods, if you go back to Northridge, was about 24% hard surfaces. So we have some definite site development differences in when areas were developed. And again, these are single family residences, so 1 EBU per resident. So this 19 acres is getting us about 122 billion units out of there. If we pop across the street to Costco, a couple acres smaller, and we can see that their hard surface areas at 12.5 out of that, which puts them at 71% hard surfaces. But this is one of those things where we go, okay, their EBU multiplier is 1. So this Costco is essentially being counted as one resident. And the same if we hop over to Home Depot, we start seeing these similar types of things where the hard surfaces are higher, the lot areas are about the same size, but we're seeing these discrepancies in our EBUs. So that's why since 1984, the development that's happened in the city, we're starting to really dive into this harder data here and try to figure out how we can sort the system out to update it to our standards today. And that concludes our tour. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it back off to Bree, or actually off to Jeff now, excuse me. And he can start getting into some of the other points of interest.
Thanks, Mike. So we just saw quite a few areas across the city that have some discrepancies in how the stormwater utility revenues are collected. Costco has one, Peninsula Shopping Center has 20 some odd. Those types of discrepancies is one of the main reasons why we are looking at going to council and changing some of these. And the way we change this is through updating rules and policies that have been established to fund the city's stormwater utility. These rules and policies are established in code. And so we are going to be now, as we proceed into October, we're going to be using what Mike just showed you, the aid of aerial photography and GIS, to recalculate actual hard surfaces on developed properties. We're going to be considering how multifamily accounts are being billed by residential unit or by hard surface area. We're also going to be reviewing other ways to determine fair and equitable rates. And we're going to ask the questions, should we use flat rates? Should we look specifically at the codes used on use for the site? So is it commercial? Is it multifamily? Is it residential? Or should we just look at flat out hard surfaces? Just determine everything based off of hard surfaces? Or should we have a blending of methods? So all of this is up in the air and part of the discussion tonight and in the future with council. Now, on this slide, we want to show you how Gig Harbor currently compares with other jurisdictions relative to stormwater rates. And what you'll see, and I know it's hard to see, but I'll point out a few things to you here. Gig Harbor is pretty consistent with what other jurisdictions in Western Washington are doing. So we have a listing of just some various municipalities. That's on the left. The next column shows whether or not they provide a private facility discount. And then the next column is the residential monthly rate for comparison purposes, and the commercial monthly rate for comparison purposes. And then a couple columns, one with comments and one with any published explanations of rate reductions. And Gig Harbor is highlighted near the middle in orangish yellow on my screen. I want to point out though that hopefully you can see this data, but if you can't, I'm going to tell you that the city is not, we're basically in the middle. We're in the norm. We're not doing outside of what others are doing in terms of rates and any discounts. We do provide a discount as the code currently reads, the rate structure currently reads. And that discount is for those properties that developed under City of Gig Harbor standards and have approved detention facilities or directly discharged to the Puget Sound. But that doesn't always determine on whether or not you should be paying those rates, is whether or not you have a discount based on detention facilities or direct discharge. It still costs the city the same to operate our utility, whether or not you have that. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at this. We can also provide you, and I'll go over this later, but we're going to be able to provide this presentation via video later if you want to look at this, or you can email us for a copy of this slide in particular if you want to look at this table up close. So now I'm going to hand it back to Bree, and she's going to talk about site development regulations.
Thanks, Jeff. So again, we all contribute to stormwater pollution, and although there are development standards in place for single family residence and construction practices stormwater pollution is the largest water pollution problem in urban areas of Washington. So this is what a single family resident contributes to pollution potentially. So, runoff of pet waste, leaves, fertilizer, etc. And then we think about, what does a development look like? Tens to hundreds of homes all contributing to stormwater pollution. And then on a bigger level, commercial developments, they also have standards that they must meet for site development. But again, they have more hard surfaces, more auto traffic, and associated more pollution. So Jeff is going to talk to us about what we need to revise.
We're going to be focusing our approach on what we're going to be revising on Chapter 1410 of the city's municipal code, Gig Harbor Municipal Code. The city's code is available online. This is just a snapshot of what our Chapter 1410 looks like and the subsections within it. But you can see this online and look at this in detail. So we're going to look at the highlighted sections primarily for this study. We're going to be looking at section 1410.010 definitions, and we're going to primarily consider revising the definition of the equivalent billing unit, EBU, that we use now to correlate between single-family residential sites and multifamily or commercial sites. And then we're going to be looking at the rate policy in the next section. We want to be able to verify the basis of the stormwater charge and establish the method of the measurement that we're going to use. And then next, for classification of property, we're going to be considering the variety of land uses compared to the amount of hard surfaces, and see if we need to adjust any classifications of property. Next, we're going to be looking at undeveloped property. We're going to be discussing with council if it is appropriate to continue to not charge undeveloped properties a stormwater fee. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at stormwater rates, but not the actual rate itself. This section includes the rates, but we're going to be looking at the very end of the section, and we're going to be focusing on whether or not it's appropriate to remove what we think is an antiquated discount established back in 1984 that allows certain properties to receive a significant reduction in their stormwater rates. So those are all that we're going to be talking about. Again, we've highlighted the stormwater rates. The actual monthly rate that we're going to be that residents get charged, we're not going to be talking about that at this point. That's later in the year and into 2022. So next steps. So staff is going to be working to draft these revisions to the code that we just went over. We're going to be meeting with the Public Works Committee at their October 12th meeting. That meeting starts at 3 p.m. and is currently available through virtually through the city's website. If you go onto the city calendar on the city's website and click on the date of October 12th, you will see at 3 o'clock. It talks about a Public Works Committee, and you can click on that link and watch via this Zoom link that we will have out. And then next, we're going to have a public hearing that will include the draft revisions that we staff will be presenting to City Council. The public will have an opportunity to comment on that draft revisions to the code and make formal comments to City Council. We don't have an exact date identified, but we anticipate that the public hearing and review of the draft ordinance will occur at the council's October 25th meeting, and that meeting starts at 5:30. But take a look at the city's website to verify if you're interested in making comment and at the public hearing for this. And then lastly, we're going to have a final draft recommendations that are going to be provided to council at what will likely be their November 8th meeting. And that will be based off of input from the public at the public hearing and any final revisions and comments the council has. So that's the schedule. And then one final comment on the schedule is we do anticipate having the new code effective January 1st of 2022. So that will give us time to go through all of this in October, November, and have council adopt formal revisions to code, and then have an effective date ideally on January 1st, 2022. So now's the time for questions. And before we actually open the floor, I just want to go through how we're going to do questions in this format. Usually open houses is just one-on-ones. Staff is there for people to come and up to and ask. But what we're going to be doing is, if you're on Facebook, just provide a response in the comments. And again, we'll have staff reviewing those and be able to bring those forward. If you're watching via Zoom, there's at the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand button. Click on that, and then you'll be put into the queue to be asked questions. Okay, well, I thank you for joining us, and I thank you for your patience as we've walked you through our stormwater history and rates and policies. I know that this can be very dry material, no pun intended for stormwater, but it can be. And it is a lot to take in all at once. There's a lot of background behind this, and there's a lot of development that's occurred, and it was a lot of infrastructure that we have in place. And so we are trying to provide a quick synopsis of this, but we do have the ability, we've recorded this, so you can rewatch this if you want to go back and reference anything. But we also have our staff available to answer questions. And so best way to reach us right now is via email. These are our email addresses that you can reach out to us and ask us any questions via email if you think of them later. We have some hands up already. We'll get to those in just a quick second. But if you think of something later, or you'd rather not ask a question, or you're watching this later and you have a question, feel free to reach out to us at these email addresses. So thank you. And I'll go ahead and take some questions. Looks like the first one we have is from David Schweitzer.
It's Switzer, please.
Switzer.
And I actually have 7, so you can let me ask them all, or you can make me come back 7 times, whichever you like.
Well, the attendance is not that great. I think we'll just go through them all 7.
That's actually question number 7. I know last night you left it on. We had about 8 people in the audience. Can you tell me about how many there are tonight?
Well, I can only tell you how many I see via Zoom. And
Sure.
Right now I see 6.
Okay, so similar.
Yep.
So is my first question is hard surface, and Jeff kind of touched on this, but is hard surface the only runoff issue? In other words, do we feel that runoff into the bay occurs when hard surface has been put down, but not when it's the original natural forest underbrush?
Well, I'll start by answering that, and maybe Bree can jump in if she has a more complete answer. We look at runoff from all surfaces. Hard surface is a broad term that we use that is both pervious hard surface and impervious hard surface. So a pervious hard surface would be pervious concrete. It could be some sort of gravel. Impervious surface would be regular old standard concrete, regular old asphalt. But we also have, and impervious hard surface would be roofs. But we also have runoff from that comes from natural areas, though there's not very much. And then we also have runoff from landscaped areas, grasses often. And so we are looking at all of that runoff that comes in collectively and how we need to deal with it. And it's not just treat it. It's not just make sure that we don't have too much flow and exceed the capacity of our conveyance system, but it's all of that combined. I hope I answered your question.
So it's not just hard surface that we want to base the rates on as a penalty or an inducement. Although I presume that pervious hard surfaces might, if we were doing it by the square foot of imperviousness, might get a lower rate per square foot, or landscape might get a lower rate, and natural might get a lowest rate since it was there before and the environment's kind of adapted to that much runoff. Would that be a fair way of looking at this, or is that something being considered?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. We have considered that. However, there's some reasons why we wouldn't necessarily just focus on or primarily focus on amount of runoff coming from impervious hard surfaces. And that's because regardless, even if every surface, including hard surface in the city of Gig Harbor was pervious and most of the groundwater or most of the stormwater runoff run into the groundwater, we still have to manage our utility. And so we still have to pay for all of the requirements, the permitting requirements that Bree outlined. But also many developed properties in the city now fall under our latest regulations, which were under what we have as a 2016 Stormwater Management Manual. And that manual requires a lot, or requires people to either infiltrate stormwater or detain it in a pond and then slowly meter release it. So there's a bunch of ways that this, through EPA, Department of Ecology, and the city, that all of these new develops are mitigating their impacts for heavy runoff, which might have been the case back in the 70s and the 80s, but is less the issue now. And so now we're just looking at what is appropriate to charge utility users, utility customers, so that we can do what we need to do to manage the stormwater utility and have some level of comparison based off of the amount of area that they own and operate within that is private.
I can understand you're wanting a paycheck. I can also think that if we did a good job about mitigation, the size of the organization might be able to remain constant or shrink, just as a conservative person. But let's not go down that path for now. My second question, are all properties in the service area billed for storm runoff?
Not all properties, undeveloped properties that essentially in their natural state without any hard surfaces, without any buildings or structures on them, are not billed a utility rate right now, or utility monthly, usually monthly rate.
But everybody, whether they're in the city limits or not, if they're in your service area, they are billed the same?
Well, they're all, and let me back up. The city's service area is the city limits. The basins, even though they cross jurisdictional lines, we don't charge someone that's unincorporated Pierce County a stormwater rate. Pierce County does charge them a stormwater rate, but we don't.
But they're using our infrastructure, right? The infrastructure that Bree has built.
They are using our infrastructure, yes. And so, but same thing goes in the opposite direction. Properties that are in the city of Gig Harbor, there are some properties in the city of Gig Harbor that discharge and use the infrastructure of Pierce County. And so since we're both public agencies, we consider that a wash because.
Well, as a resident of Gig Harbor that pays my portion, I'd like to see backfilling between the county and the city so that the city residents aren't paying for the county residents' use. But that's just one data point.
Well, and I think that's a valid data point, but I just want to reiterate that a lot of what the stormwater rates pay for is not related to flows. It's related to operation and management of our stormwater permit. And so
if you're operating and managing the whole area, then you should get paid for operating and managing the whole area, whether it's by residents or by the county or the non-residents. Anyway, we can move on. What adjustment is made for people that have put money into mitigation, whether that was dictated by the building codes when their property was improved, or they did it out of the goodness of their heart and a mind for ecology? In other words, I catch my work runoff and it goes into a settling area. It doesn't run off into the city streets. Should I pay the same amount for my roof impervious area as someone that runs it out to the gutter?
That's a good question. I think that is something that the council would like to hear. If you think that if comparable you versus your next door neighbor in a residence are doing something to mitigate and reduce your runoff, that you think that there's a justifiable reason to have that a reduced rate. That would take more management by the city, and it also wouldn't again necessarily affect, because we're not talking about the fees takes necessarily to upsize infrastructure, because we're not looking to upsize our stormwater infrastructure really in most cases. We're just looking to manage what we already operate.
Still, the management might be attributed toward people that have more runoff versus people that have mitigated their runoff. It doesn't take much to manage my property, since I have, unless a storm is very, very large, I have essentially no runoff. Everything soaks into the ground. Again, one resident's input. Oh, I wanted to ask, what is, they said they'll take all the questions. I'm sure you can ask your questions too. What is exempted and why? Obviously, undeveloped properties come up.
I'm going to ask which properties are exempted from paying a stormwater rate other than
Not
undeveloped
specific
properties?
properties, but what types of properties are exempted or, I mean, for instance, schools. They're a public thing, but does that mean that, again, residents need to directly pay for their storm mitigation, the management of their stormwater?
Okay.
Who all is exempted? Public streets, I presume?
Public streets are exempted because they're not parcels, or they're not property. They're considered right of way, but yes, public streets are. And so, Heather, maybe you can chime in on that and say what other parcels classes are exempted from paying a monthly stormwater rate other than undeveloped properties.
Our code, the properties exempt from service charges are city streets right of ways. And then state of Washington and Pierce County highway right of ways. That's the only thing currently in our code that's exempt from service charges. And then, of course, the undeveloped properties.
How about schools and city buildings?
They all pay stormwater charges.
Oh, okay. Well, as a resident, I'm happy to hear that that's equitable.
The city pays the city pays for storm charges too.
How many people live in City Hall? How many EDUs?
The calculation of a facility such as ours is based off of well, that's why we're looking at that right now. I'm pretty sure City Hall pays 1 EBU, but we don't. That's why we're looking at this. And is that equitable? So if it's not equitable, then we need to adjust that, and we will adjust that across the board, not just. And we're not going to have an exemption for city buildings to have an exemption and nobody else.
I think we covered my question number 5, but in city limits versus outside city limits, they are, as a general rule, billed and the rates are the same, independent of whether they're inside or outside the city limits. Or no, I'm sorry, because if they're in the county, then the county bills them something different. Do we have any idea whether the load on a property is similar if they're in the county versus in the city? The financial load?
I don't know right now what the single family residential rate, for example, would be in the county. Heather, I don't know if you know what that would be.
Isn't it on the spreadsheet that was presented today with the list? I think, as far as I know, it's slightly less than what we bill for single family residential.
Okay.
Slightly less doesn't bother me. There's no way we can read your spreadsheet, by the way.
Maybe we can read it for you though.
Yeah, we can read it for you. Mike's going to bring it up, and then we can look for Pierce County here.
Yeah, Pierce County 1321.
1321 a month. Yep.
And we pay about 35 a month.
No, city pays 1492 a month.
I thought I got a $70 storm drain bill every 2 months. I'll check my bill. Maybe I'm
Okay.
wrong.
Yeah, that might include another utility.
My last question. The Costco paying 1 EBU and I guess it was the old 7 Cs paying 25, and or maybe that was the new part of Uptown, the Ace Hardware, and then across the street 250 or something. If I heard that correctly, there's a phenomenal discrepancy. How many of those are cast in concrete because of agreements with the developer or the owner of the property at the time of development, or are they all up for equitable adjustment?
Well, the way the code reads today, they are up for equitable adjustments based on whether or not they have approved stormwater facilities that were created under the city's jurisdiction. Now, I'll go to the Seven Seas Peninsula Shopping Center site. They don't have stormwater detention. They don't have stormwater facilities. So we would not allow them to receive that discount. The new Fred Meyer, they do. They just redeveloped, and the new Safeway, they have just redeveloped and constructed, mitigated their stormwater runoff based off of the code that was in place at the time. And so that's why their numbers are less than the one across the street, the Harbor Plaza, which was developed under Pierce County and wasn't developed under city stormwater codes.
Well, since we're not really billing with respect to how much runoff there is or how much hard surface there is, but rather how much management's involved, if that's really what you're trying to accomplish, I can't believe that every resident requires as much management as Costco or Fred Meyer's.
Yes, that's a very good point, and that's one of the reasons that staff has been looking at this with council and saying that doesn't make sense. Does a homeowner on a quarter-acre lot require as much management as Costco?
Thank you for addressing all of my questions. My wife has one too, or mom.
Sure.
If you have time for one more, looking at your chart, I just want to check my understanding. If I'm reading the chart correctly, the residential monthly rate of $14.92, that's one unit, and that could be a condo with a patio, or it could be a 2-acre yard. Is that true?
It could be either one of those. If it's considered a single family residential unit by our land use coding, then yes, it would be either one of those.
Okay, and regardless of the number of occupants or any of that.
Regardless.
On the commercial side, your chart says per 2,000 feet. So is it the case that most businesses in the Gig Harbor city area are actually charged $14.92 per 2,000 feet? And do the individual businesses pay that? Or is that in some way a shopping center bill that is allocated across 30 businesses and has nothing to do with square feet?
We aren't certain how many of the developed commercial properties across Gig Harbor are receiving the discount, are charged, or which is the column just to the right, because they have an approved city detention facility, or if they're being charged exactly based on $14.92 per each 2,200 square feet. That's one of the things we are going to be looking at with the data that Mike is collecting and Heather is preparing. But we do recognize that there is a discrepancy, and that's one of the big reasons why we're trying to rectify that here.
My detention facility was approved also. I'd like a discount. I'll mute myself now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions from the Zoom attendees or from anyone watching on Facebook?
I don't have any comments on Facebook.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Okay, well,
A procedural question, if I may. I didn't know how to shoot a screenshot, I should have, of all your email addresses and names and titles. Is there any convenient way to distribute that list of names and emails? Or for that matter, a link to where the recorded presentation is going to be posted? It's nice that you're going to post it. It's nice that you're showing us the emails, but I have no idea what to do tomorrow to find them.
okay. If you jot people's names down and go to cityofgigharbor.net, and you will go to our website and just look for the staff connections. And also on cityofgigharbor.net, you can look for the stormwater utility, and this will be under the stormwater utility. Josh, is there anywhere else that they could go to quickly, easily find that?
Yeah, I think the website that you used to get the link for this Zoom meeting, that web page will be updated with the with the video and the presentation tomorrow.
Okay, can you put the names and emails on that webpage also?
Yeah, I can do that in the morning. Yep.
Perfect. I'd like to compliment you on tonight's presentation versus last night's presentation. It helps to rehearse.
Thank you. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions from the attendees. Oh, looks like we have one. Yes, listed as Matthew Brown.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, just a quick question. I noticed that some of those different cities have discounts for seniors and disabled. Is that going to ever be considered for our area in Gig Harbor?
Heather, can you please describe the current discount we have?
The discount is not applicable to stormwater. The current discount we have is just for water and sewer, not stormwater.
So that is something that if you would like to make that comment, you definitely could, and suggest that the stormwater utility also receive a discount for senior and or low income.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Again, appreciate everyone sticking through this. I know this can be sometimes hard to understand or confusing, and there's a lot that goes into it. So appreciate your time, and we will hope to see you at the public hearing later in October or at the Public Works Committee meeting in October. Thank you.